You're still waiting for permission. That's true. You probably are. But here's the mistake. You think you're waiting for confidence. You're not. Think about how most of your life has worked. Before you spoke, someone called your name. Before you answered, someone asked the question. Before you took the test, someone told you it was time to begin. For years, almost everything important happened the same way. There was always a signal, a teacher, a deadline, a manager, a schedule. Someone else decided when the next step started. It happens so often. Your brain quietly accepted it as normal. Then, one day, that system disappeared. Nobody tells you when to write the book. Nobody announces that you're finally qualified to start a business. Nobody sends an email saying you're ready to change your life. And suddenly, you stop moving. Not because you don't care, not because you're lazy, because you're waiting for something you've been trained to expect your entire life. Permission. The strange part is, most people don't realize that's what they're waiting for. They call it overthinking, fear, perfectionism, lack of confidence. But sometimes none of those are the real problem. Sometimes your brain is simply searching for an authority that no longer exists. Think about how uncomfortable, completely open-ended freedom can feel. Imagine someone tells you, do whatever you want. At first, that sounds exciting. Then the questions begin. What if I choose the wrong thing? What if I'm not ready? What if there's something I should learn first? What if someone more experienced would tell me to wait? Notice what's happening. You're not looking for information. You're looking for confirmation. They're not the same thing. Information helps you make a decision. Confirmation removes the responsibility for making it. There's a reason external permission feels so reassuring when someone else tells you it's time. Part of the responsibility quietly shifts away from you. If a teacher tells you to take the exam, you don't spend hours wondering whether today was the right day. If your manager gives you a new responsibility, you assume someone has already decided you're capable of handling it. The decision has been made. Your job is simply to act. But self-directed work doesn't work that way. Nobody checks whether your idea is good enough before you begin. Nobody reviews your plan and stamps it approved. You have to make that decision yourself. And that's exactly what makes it so uncomfortable. Not because you're incapable of deciding, but because you've spent years in environments where important decisions were usually confirmed by someone else first. Your brain isn't asking for certainty. It's asking for a familiar structure. That's why waiting can feel strangely safe. As long as nobody has officially told you to begin, you never have to discover what happens if you fail. Your future stays protected inside possibility. The moment you act, possibility becomes reality, and reality can disappoint you. So your brain finds a surprisingly convincing solution. Keep preparing. Read one more book. Watch one more video. Take one more course. Improve your plan. Wait until you feel more certain. From the outside, it looks responsible. From the inside, it feels responsible. But underneath all those perfectly reasonable decisions, one question quietly remains. Who am I waiting for? Most people never ask it, because the habit feels invisible. It doesn't feel like waiting for permission. It just feels like being careful, like being realistic, like making sure the timing is right. And that's exactly why this pattern can last for years. Because it doesn't look like fear. It looks like maturity. The strange thing is, your brain isn't doing anything irrational. It's doing exactly what it was taught to do. For years, waiting for permission was the correct strategy. You couldn't simply decide to take the exam early. You couldn't grade your own work. You couldn't promote yourself. Someone else always decided when you were allowed to move forward. So your brain learned an important rule. Progress begins when someone else says it does. That rule works surprisingly well, until it doesn't, because the most meaningful parts of adult life rarely come with instructions. Nobody tells you when you're ready to write your first book. Nobody tells you when you're qualified enough to launch an idea. Nobody officially announces that it's time to become the person you've been imagining. Those decisions stop coming from the outside. But your brain keeps looking outside anyway. That's why freedom feels so much heavier than people expect. We usually imagine freedom as the absence of limits. But psychologically, it's also the absence of certainty. No schedule, no authority, no final approval, just you, making decisions that nobody can guarantee are correct. That's uncomfortable. Not because you're weak, because uncertainty always asks more of you than instructions do. Instructions remove responsibility. Freedom gives it back. And responsibility is heavy. That's why waiting can feel productive. You're still researching, still preparing, still improving. It feels like you're moving. But sometimes, you're simply delaying the moment when the decision becomes yours. The difficult part isn't taking the first step. The difficult part is accepting that nobody can make it feel official. Think about how often people say, "I'll know when I'm ready." But ready according to who? What exactly are you waiting to feel? A sudden certainty? A complete lack of fear? Some invisible line that tells you you've earned the right to begin? Most of the time, those signals never arrive. Not because something is wrong, because they were never promised in the first place. That's what makes this trap so difficult to notice. It doesn't feel like waiting. It feels like wisdom. It feels responsible. It feels patient. Sometimes years pass this way. Not because people stop caring, but because every month of preparation feels easier to justify than one irreversible decision. The waiting becomes so familiar that eventually it stops feeling like waiting at all. It simply becomes the way you live. Until one day, you realize you've been standing at the starting line, waiting for a race that was never going to have a starting gun. Maybe that's the real difference between people who eventually build something meaningful and everyone still preparing to begin. Not that one group is fearless, not that one group is more confident, but that eventually they stop expecting life to officially invite them. Maybe you're not waiting for confidence. Maybe you're not waiting for the perfect moment. Maybe you're waiting for permission from a system that no longer exists. And once you see that, the question changes completely. It stops being, "Am I ready?" It becomes, "Why am I still expecting someone else to decide that for me?" Because the strange thing about freedom is that it almost never announces itself. One day, the permission you've been waiting for quietly becomes your own decision.